All right, welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you here. Last breakout of the day. Hopefully we still have tons of energy to take notes, to ask questions. I'm so excited to have this session where we have Emily and Luke talk about turning marketing to business outcomes. So with that, enjoy.
Thank you. Can you all hear us all right? Yeah. Okay, great. Should do quick introductions to get us started.
I'm Luke. I'm with Domo. I'm the paid media director on the marketing team.
And I am Emily Gustin. I head up LinkedIn's marketing measurement partnerships, so reporting and attribution, of which Domo is one of our wonderful partners. We're here today to talk about B2B marketing measurement, so let's just get right stuck into it. All right.
So, Emily, what do you see today as the most significant changes in B2B measurement? And going back, let's make sure we really emphasize the B2B aspect itself.
Sure. So I think for the group, I want to be super clear what I mean when I say B2B versus B2C. So B2C is like the classic direct-to-consumer type of business. So think, Procter & Gamble, think L'Oreal. B2B is a business that sells into other businesses. So Domo is a great example, or other software companies. Other examples would be, folks that are in the professional services realm. So businesses like, consultancies, for example. And in terms of what are the most significant changes in B2B marketing measurement, I want to first start with what stayed the same, which the answer is that it's really freaking hard to do B2B marketing measurement, and has always been really hard. And I'll get a little bit into the why. So measuring B2B marketing is very, very tough because the B2B buying journey is very complicated. And also because there's oftentimes misalignment on KPIs that you're measuring against. So when I say complicated, I think that can be broken down into two parts. One, there's really not one buyer in B2B. It's often, buying by committee. So you might have somebody who is, making the recommendation versus somebody who's done the research, and then, finally the head of department that's ending up committing funding, right? So there's a lot of buyers. That's very hard to track, and that's very hard to measure. And the second is the sales cycle for B2B is so much longer than it is for B2C. And we'll get into that a bit later in the presentation. So the journey is tough. And then there's oftentimes, like I noted, sort of misalignment on KPIs, or let's just be honest, between marketing and sales, to be honest. So we're going to get a little bit into the marketing qualified lead and how sales deals with that, but there tends to be a bit of friction there. And this is a pretty fair visual of the B2B buying journey, which has so many touch points across many individuals. So you might have, start with some research online, or somebody sees an ad, right? And then there's networking, comparing brands to each other, maybe demoing different solutions, reading case studies, and finally making a business case, right? And securing the budget to actually buy something. And if you were to measure this whole process with what we call last click in the world of attribution, or last touch, which would just mean that we give that final point before the sale all of the credit for what happened before. So let's say whoever was tied from an advertising channel perspective to the lead that ended up converting. You would miss all of the stuff in this constellation before that last point, which both means that the crediting would be incorrect, and also that you're missing all of the insights on the stuff that happened prior. So it's really hard then to design strategies as a marketer that will be effective if you don't know everything that came before the end. Now I'm going to answer your question on what's changed. And I wanted to bring up some data from LinkedIn's B2B Institute. I think this is supposed to be the world over there. We might have lost the countries in the background. But LinkedIn's B2B Institute is a LinkedIn-funded think tank that really dives into what the best practices are for B2B marketers. And they did research with a few thousand decision makers in the marketing space to understand, what's top of mind for them, what are the pressures that they're encountering right now. There's a few findings that stood out. So the first is that marketing leaders are under more pressure than they've ever been before. You're a marketer, you may notice this, you may hear it from your colleagues and those around you. And I think this really comes back to the economy. It's been a tough few years globally, and there's more pressure than ever before for CMOs, for marketing orgs to drive revenue. Like just saying, we drove up sentiment or we got a bunch of clicks, isn't really cutting it anymore. The second thing is that there's more to measure than there was in the past. So in B2B advertising, folks used to do a lot of demand generation. So think like lead gen campaigns only. And now there is a move to do brand to demand. Like leaders really understand that we need to make a potential buyer aware of our brand before we actually try to sell into them. So that means that the aperture of what you're measuring has just widened a lot. And then finally, I would be remiss not to talk about the world of data privacy and all that's going on there. And because of this sort of signal loss, as is the common refrain in the industry, just meaning we have less actual touch points that we can gather at a very granular level, it's hard to find new buyers accurately and to end up closing those buyers at an efficient rate. So stuff like cost per acquisition is beginning to peak, right? So to put a just kind of summary on all of that, the three main trends that we're seeing right now is more pressure than ever before, need to drive revenue, more to measure than ever before, but less to measure it with. So it's a tough time. And this slide is a bit of a flyby, but I want to share, this is a stack rank of kind of concerns for CMOs. You'll see that revenue driving impact for the business is clearly number one. About half of marketing leaders cite that as their top concern right now.
So how would you describe the current landscape of B2B measurement and tools available to marketers?
So the industry has historically been grounded in stuff that works for B2C, which makes sense because, B2B ad spend is about 10% of global ad spend, so it's a smaller piece of the pie. And so what I mean by B2C friendly tools is that they often center around what we'd call frontline metrics, meaning those that you observe immediately, stuff like cost per click or click-through rate. And they often use shorter look-back windows, so looking at stuff on a week or a month time frame versus the much longer time frame that's needed to observe B2B outcomes. And so it can be really hard to use those tools and get an accurate picture of what's working or not for B2B. And so I said I was going to talk a little bit about sales cycle and the length of the journey here. We found that about over half, actually, of B2B advertisers have sales cycles that are more than 6 months long. And the average B2B sales cycle is actually 16 months. But only 4% of marketers are measuring with a look back that's longer than 6 months. So if you think about that, there's a huge disconnect between what we're measuring around, right, and what we're driving toward as a business. That disconnect makes it very hard to plan effectively, to optimize effectively, to deliver results effectively. Another challenge is that marketing and sales oftentimes have different KPIs, and this is also reflected in the tools available to marketers today. And they often use very different tech stacks as well. So the data doesn't even talk to each other. And a stat that I'd cite here is that majority of marketers, so 70% of marketers, look at the marketing qualified lead, or the MQL, as their source of truth metric. That's really what they're anchoring around. But less than half of those MQLs end up moving to a sales qualified lead stage. So what that tells us is that okay, of those that marketing has blessed, under half of those end up being blessed by sales, saying we really want to outreach to these folks. So there's a major disconnect there. So there's not a ton that's like really, really robust in the world of B2B today. Tools like a Domo actually do a great job, though, because there really are purpose-built solutions that enable you to work with lots of data, long look-back windows, et cetera, and to kind of like calm the data chaos that happens in the world of B2B. And this is also something that LinkedIn is really committed to solving with a suite of purpose-built tools for B2B. And I'll share some examples a bit further in the presentation.
Nice. So you're talking about frontline and business outcome metrics. Which KPIs would you consider right now are the most relevant for that B2B measurement?
So I think the true north is going to be, for B2B advertisers, is going to be metrics that sort of center around business outcomes. And what I mean by business outcome is like something that actually moves your business forward, like it makes a difference in your business's future. That could be something like revenue generated or influenced. It could be, qualified leads or pipe driven. It could be something a little bit, let's say, higher up the funnel, like priority accounts for your sales team that you've gotten engagement from. And I'd be remiss not to talk about like brand advertising here as well, because it's quite hard to tie that brand spend to something like revenue, for example. In the world of brand, we know that it is important to spend on brand advertising. In the world of B2B, actually, especially, because it's hard for people to understand, like, what am I buying and why, and what's the difference between these solutions. The metric that we would sort of advise moving toward is something like mental availability. And what that means is basically, does somebody think of your brand when they're in a buying situation? And so like classic example here would be if I need to go buy toothpaste, I immediately think of Crest. Like that is the first thing that would come to mind. Or if I'm buying a CRM, like I would think, okay, like Salesforce and HubSpot, right? Like that might be where I'd move toward. And so does somebody think of your brand in a buying situation would be like the true north that I would look to for brand advertising. It doesn't mean that those frontline metrics are not important, right? Like measurement, because I've said B2B, it's so long, right? You sort of have to measure like the long and the short. Mm-hmm. And so the frontline metrics are sort of more like those leading indicators that tell you like right now, is this thing resonating? Is this piece of content resonating? Is audience resonating? So those metrics like, cost per click, cost per mil, CPM, or click-through rate are still really important. It's just that I think the industry is shifting away from those being viewed as like the end goal that you're trying to drive, and the end goal is something more that's like business outcome related. Totally.
So I would say, based on what you just said, right, here at Domo, we're super lucky because we get to use Domo. And a lot of the data that you're talking about in terms of from the ground up is just that, right? So when we look at something like this is what essentially are those frontline metrics, right? And this is, you could call it the day-to-day. This is what people are using. This is a LinkedIn campaign itself, by the way, but this is literally the data we're using to affect creatives, about ads, audiences, right? The actual content in the platform, the signals we're receiving from this level of data give us those kind of optimization hints on, okay, this is what's working, right? This is what we should emphasize from there. But onto the next slide, as you are exactly right with, it goes so much deeper with that. And we have such an excellent ops team that can put together this kind of stuff for us where we're looking at, so for the audience, think of the columns here, the campaigns themselves are actually just that, right? They're LinkedIn audiences, they're LinkedIn campaigns in their own right. And each of them kind of is its own entity, but when you look at it at on a mapping scale like this is where we get not only the MQLs that Sarah's talking about, but you're looking at SALs, the sales accepted leads, sales qualified opportunities, right, the S3, all the way through to where they're literally becoming sales KPIs, but they're still important for marketing because we can see the decisions we make on the frontline metrics and how they have an effect on these business outcomes, right? So all the way through to like the pipeline, the conversion rates, the stuff that not just our marketing leadership, but all the way up to the CEO are looking at. Again, we're making those decisions on the ground level with the frontline metrics, but they have such that cascading effect through the business, right? And then kind of we're looking at this data, and that's driving the strategy. That's driving, okay, what of these campaigns earns more budget for the next quarter? It's really we have to look at it at that 10,000 view, and if we 10,000 foot view, and if we don't, then like you say, we're just getting lost in the front line.
So what you're saying is basically like the CPC, CPM type stuff is used for more day-to-day decisioning, and then the business outcome metrics like pipe and revenue generated is used for a bit more like strategic level of decisioning.
That, and then, so yes, completely that, but the ability to see it all in one view, right?
Yeah.
To really be able to bring that data together where that junior campaign manager can make a decision based on, okay, this campaign's doing especially well in pipeline, by all means put money towards it, right? A lot of times we can't do that with just the platform, or we can't do that when you have different platforms that aren't speaking on the same language.
Yeah. I'll give an example of sort of what this looks like in LinkedIn's tool as well, and this is an approach that Domo also uses within LinkedIn. So we've created something called the Revenue Attribution Report, which is a screenshot of on this slide. And what that enables marketers to do is to zone in on this outcomes type of measurement. So they can connect their CRM securely to LinkedIn via secure data pipe. And then what we do on the back end is compare, an individual that saw an ad or engaged with an ad to action that happens in your CRM, like a qualified lead or open pipe or a closed won deal, to say, what do we think is the impact of your LinkedIn marketing investment on these like real business outcomes? So this is one example of how LinkedIn sort of tries to answer that same question. And I know there is who's doing it well is always in question. So I wanted to give a tangible example here. I would say Domo is also doing this very well, Domo marketing on LinkedIn, because you all use this product and this exact approach. But I want to use a nice publicly available case study to kind of hammer it home with a brand called Cognism, which is a B2B sales prospecting tool. And what they did was they used the revenue attribution report, and they were able to see that, as compared to the prior credit that they were giving LinkedIn, that LinkedIn actually ended up driving 10% shorter deal cycles. So from opportunity to close, 14% larger deal sizes. So that's like how large is the closed won deal end up coming out to, and then 8% higher likelihood for those deals to close. You'll see the quote here from our friend Cambric Becker, who's basically saying like, due to what we've seen from these insights, we were able to lift LinkedIn marketing spend fairly considerably. And as a result, our growth has 2x'd in terms of revenue generation. So the goal of this tool is really not to be like, all right, now you just need to come spend on LinkedIn. It's more to look under the stone and to see what is actually working, right? And what are the real outcomes that you're driving. That can be done at the campaign level then, and you can say, these type of campaigns are doing really well at driving pipe and revenue, or these are struggling a bit, right? And I want to shift my allocation, or I want to change my strategy based off of that. So just a tangible example to kind of bring it home there.
For us doing that, it just, like you say, the data that it unlocked, and it wasn't just, okay, well, here's what we put into LinkedIn and what we get out, but it's like, how does LinkedIn affect paid search, email, organic, right? There was so much that we did not see.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. Cool. So with these increasing concerns about data, obviously everybody's talking about privacy and security these days. How would you say marketers should proceed in such a way to keep that privacy first and foremost?
So I think my first kind of point here is about the actual world of signal, which always tends to get kind of hairy. So I'll try to do it, at a kindergarten as much level as I can. The first recommendation would really be to understand what are the key actions that matter to your business, what are those key points along the sales journey, and then to track and measure them in a secure way. So rather than relying on the third-party cookie, where you're basically tracking a user from site to site to site and saying okay, we know that, person ABC moved here, 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 and here, and then they ended up delivering, a sale. We'd recommend using first-party data. So one approach would be, conversions APIs are coming into vogue right now. One would be using a conversions API. And the way that works is you're uploading your first-party data directly to an advertising platform like a LinkedIn or a Meta. You're saying like, we know these people are within our world. They're either our current customers or they've given us leads, and we want to see, did something happen on your platform like during that period? Can we match it, right? And this is done via very encrypted, secure type of technology. The second recommendation here is honestly like simplify things by working with vendors that can, already have this tech in place, like secure data pipelines, clean room technology, for example, and also like whose job it is to handle the compliance. Particularly if you are a global marketing organization, the privacy landscape is evolving so quickly that at LinkedIn, I feel like we have a team of hundreds of lawyers whose job it is just to keep on track of what is the latest in privacy legislation, right? So if you're a brand, that can be very, very time and resource intensive. I recommend working with vendors that you trust, they have the right tech, they're well known in the industry and trusted, and also that can take some of that compliance off your hands. It is their job to stay on top of what is going on in Europe versus APAC, for example, as it pertains to privacy legislation. And then the last recommendation would be to use multiple different types of measurement methods, kind of in an overlapping approach, to end up, driving outcomes particular use cases like planning into others like optimization, and also just have a better view of performance. And so I'm going to use a very corny metaphor here, but the Swiss cheese metaphor, which I'm sure everyone heard during COVID of you can protect yourself in all these different ways. I would say that holds very true for marketing measurement right now, right? If you're going to use any one form of marketing measurement, there's going to be holes in it. It's 2024. That's what we're dealing with, right? But if you use a few in an overlapping fashion, you're pretty good. And so there's a few that I want to tout right now that are well positioned in the current privacy landscape. And those are measurement methods that don't rely on really, really sensitive user level data. So one would be media mix modeling. High level media mix modeling takes very aggregate data inputs, like how much did you spend on an advertising channel, and how many impressions did you receive from that channel, and it compares it to results holistically, and it models what is the link between the variables, the inputs, like spend on each channel, and the dependent variable, which would be revenue, right? So that's one form of measurement that we'd say is relatively privacy proof. It's also used heavily for planning, so that's kind of a specific use case there. Another that I would recommend is incrementality testing. And incrementality testing is often an input into media mix modeling because it's used to kind of say we think that the link is this because we've tested it. The way that incrementality testing works is you're basically saying, how much does doing this matter based on if I stop doing it, what goes away? So if I held out my brand spend for 6 months, what results don't happen, during that time or shortly after that time, which would tell me that the brand is driving those results. Then you use, what you learned from the incrementality test to kind of calibrate stuff like your media mix model. So just 2 examples, I would say the classic right now, what I see people using is kind of threefold. In an overlapping way. They use media mix modeling, they're using incrementality testing, and then they're using some type of attribution, whether that's first, last, multi-touch in the middle.
So big on that, I'd say what advice would you give to businesses now looking ahead, right, to prepare for this future of B2B measurement?
So loaded question. And I'm also going to not go in order of the slide, so just bear with. I'm going to go 1 to 4 and then backwards. The first is educate your internal teams and get aligned, right? So we're talking about there are different KPIs that matter And there's different KPIs that should be like your true north, right? So the business outcomes need to be kind of your true north. There's all these other KPIs that kind of ladder into that. And there's the whole like long and short that you want to be paying attention to. So maybe like immediately, like you spoke about, when you're like a frontline marketing manager, you should be paying attention to stuff like CPC and CTR. And then ultimately trying to back into stuff like revenue generation, right? But like how do those two things kind of like talk to each other? And like where should they be used, as it pertains to the tactics that you're employing? So like how do I think about those different KPIs for brand spend versus demand? It is so critical that you get your organization on the same page about the link between those things. Otherwise, it's just pure chaos. Sure. So alignment's the first step. The second, which is my number 4 here, is to really invest in your first-party data. I'm sure that is not like a novel idea to anybody in the audience today. What I mean by that, though, like really the importance of investing in first-party data is not even just to like market to individuals because you have, their email and they said that you could. It's actually to build up much more accurate models, right? So as like the user level signal continues to, erode, the accuracy of your business's models to predict what is the link between these things becomes so much more important. So if you have good first-party data to work off of, or you can say, we know this is the link, like we know this is how long the cycle is, or we know how app installs end up connecting to revenue, right? Like that's the type of thing that you're trying to then model out, right, and have that be accurate in the future. So investing in collecting first-party data, and I would say when there's like a real value exchange for the user, right? So you're giving them something that's valuable enough that merits them sharing their information so that it's an actual exchange. The other 2 bits here are to play the long game. Like I spoke about before, right? There's brand versus demand. There's your leading metrics and then your lagging ones, right? B2B sales cycle, super long. Like we want to be anchoring around those true north business outcome metrics, but we want to be thinking about like what comes before that, both metric-wise and tactic-wise. So invest in brand. Think about those frontline metrics. Just think about how they map to the long, And then finally, connect all of this data together. I'm a data geek, and like I'm hearing the phrase data chaos being thrown around a lot, which I kind of love and kind of hate. But really, it can get chaotic if all of this stuff is not connected together. So it's great if you're measuring like long and short and like marketing and sales or somewhat aligned, but like if you don't have tools that can bring those things into one view, like 1, nobody can understand it, and 2, nobody can action on it, right? So again, like strong tout for Domo here, I would say that like a tool like Domo is actually really, really well situated to be able to help you like create pipelines to clean up this data and tell that story, right? So it's in one view for both understanding and then actioning, on what you've learned. So those are kind of my 4 strategies to kind of just like play it back, because I know it's sometimes hard when someone goes through a big list. Get everyone on the same freaking page. Collect first-party data in a way that is like a true value exchange and build models off of that data. Think about the long game and then like connect everything data-wise internally. And I'm just gonna leave us with, this is like LinkedIn's visual on how measurement is well done, and this speaks to like the overlapping kind of approach to doing measurement well. I'm gonna riff on signals, reporting, and experimentation and kind of leave insights and verification in the lurch here. I'll touch on them lightly, but we see like the best in class B2B marketing as more like, it's like a wheel like this, right? Like you're using these solutions in an overlapping way and also in like an always on way. They feed different parts of your marketing process. So stuff like signals, which again is like collecting like what are the key points in the buying journey? What are those moments that matter, right? That's kind of like starts at the beginning, right? Like you're laying down either tags or you're setting up conversions API, for example. And then there's your reporting. That's something like the revenue attribution report that I showed you, which is saying like real time, okay, here's how this is actually translating into the outcomes that we care about. Then there's stuff like experimentation, which is just like, let's pressure test this. Did this outcome actually hold? That's something like incrementality or A/B tests, right? Which enable you to make the whole wheel a lot more effective. And then by insights and verification, insights would be, kind of more planning related. It's like, what does my audience care about? But a lot of that is fed off of like past performance data. And verification would just simply be like, did somebody see my ad that's a real person in the environment that I expect? So again, like I'd focus on the right half of the wheel here. And the key bits, or like how you can kind of think about these things in concert, is that example that I gave before of the 3 measurement methods that folks are using. So media mix modeling, incrementality testing, and then your standard kind of attribution. I think that is all she wrote. All right. We can probably turn it to the group for questions then. Or we can definitely turn it to the group for questions. So yeah. I'm assuming I'm supposed to call on people, or we are, so.
Yeah.
Thank you guys both for this today. This was very helpful. One thing that you mentioned was, does someone think of your brand in a buying situation, which is the ultimate true north? If you are not a company like a Crest, for example, what is an incremental way that you could get to that point? Obviously, there is a long game involved, but what is like those first steps that you could take?
Do you mean that from like a tactics perspective or from like a measurement perspective?
From a tactics perspective.
Yeah, I think you want to focus on like your zone of control, right? So we do a lot of work at LinkedIn with our advertisers to understand like what is your ownership of a certain topic, let's say, and then how do you like move that incrementally over time? I don't know if your LinkedIn reps have showed you these type of studies, but you might take a topic, for example, like, AI, and if you're a small brand, your ownership of that topic is going to be nil, right? Especially if you're looking to impact a huge audience. So then, all right, well, what can you control, right? Maybe there's a specific area of AI that you're really, really good and purpose-built about employing, right? So almost like dropping down a level and thinking like, what is the topic that we can actually own here? Like, what is the moment that we want to articulate about our brand? And then who should we be trying to influence, right? So if you're Crest, you're trying to influence everybody who might want toothpaste, which is hopefully the whole world. But if you're, a very specific type of business that does, very specific AI work, you might be looking for a very small cut of a buyer, right? That's not everybody. So I'd say like almost hone in your audience and figure out like who is the most important to you, and then what are the like topics that you can actually have ownership over, and those are things that you can measure ownership on over time, so you can see stuff like, how much are people mentioning my brand in relation to this topic, or how quickly do they act on our ads when we bring up this topic. That's where like I would start on the first kind of phase of brand building. And then there's stuff like, do they think of you in a buying scenario? That's stuff like, moving from brand awareness to consideration. And that's a bit of more of like the long game, right? So I'd say first, like you want to start with ownership of a specific topic amongst a specific group of people. And then from there, like once you've kind of crushed that area, then your zone of control gets a little bit larger, and you're trying to get folks to think about your brand more generally as it relates to that topic. So they think of you whenever they're thinking about it in a buying situation.
Very helpful, thank you.
Is there anything you'd add to that?
I'd just say that's like every brand lift study I've ever been a part of, no matter the platform or the partner, it starts with, you can boil it down to the keywords and the impression share, right? Like she's so right in terms of pick out your battles and then start fighting and then incrementally grow, right?
Thank you guys both very much. This is really great information. My question is, LinkedIn's somewhat of a unique platform, right? Where you have the company, where you're pushing out advertising, like I'm running ads on behalf of the company, but within the organization, you also have individual contributors putting out topics, right? And this is true for Domo, right? I see your sales reps and SEs putting out very specific information to garner conversations, right? And impressions and share and start controlling that. How do you combine those two together? Right? Like I want to foster those conversations. I want the people in my organization, because I usually have very specific insights. I want that level of engagement and show and impress upon the marketplace that we have the expertise and these are the people, but it's almost like a hub and spoke, right? Like the hub is the company, but have all these individual contributors on their own accounts that don't necessarily link back. This is true for my clients who are very branded types of organizations. So within there, they have a similar type of challenge. How do you kind of aggregate all that together and then use that to, even push out, like you said, the first party data is critical, but it doesn't live within my within the main companies.
Yeah, so interesting stat from LinkedIn is that so when companies post on LinkedIn versus when individuals post on LinkedIn, posts from individuals get way, way more engagement than companies get because people trust individuals more, and also there's more virality, right? So like if my friend Susan was posting about something and I see it and I comment on it or I like it, my other friend Sharon will likely see that in her feed, right? So there's like that ripple effect that happens. And then, of course, like again, people trust individuals more. So there's actually a lot more engagement when an individual posts versus a brand. And what I would say matters about individuals is if I was to stack rank, like where should you put your individual bets, it would be with the thought leaders within your organization or those who are like public faces, right? So we see like, heads of department or topic areas do really, really well on LinkedIn because again, it's that element of trust, right? It's like, I want to hear from you. Like you are the head of like AI, right, at Salesforce. You should be telling me like what I want to know about it. So I'd say if I'm backing into a strategy there as a CMO, you're always going to spend on advertising, and it's less likely that you're going to spend on individuals, right? So your marketing tends to be a bit separate from, let's say, employee advocacy. But I would look at marketing as the place where you're grabbing those main themes, right? Like, what do we want to have the ripple effect from? And then giving those themes to individuals, starting with heads of departments, starting with the names and faces that people know, who can talk about them credibly, right? To kind of like echo that story. And then from there, you're giving it to like the individual contributors, right? And that maybe is like once a quarter, once a half, you're saying like, hey, everybody, do you wanna tout this new tool that Domo just released, right? But before that, you might have like the product manager on it, right? They give like a manifesto about what's going on there. And in concert, then you would wanna be running advertising. So, like in summary, individuals do better from an engagement perspective. I would recommend, though, starting with the paid themes and then bringing those to the individuals that are the experts, and then going from there to the me's of the organization, right? Who are like the individual contributors underneath.
I would plug too, if you haven't tried it yet, but LinkedIn now has the thought leadership ads themselves, which is basically like somebody from your company, given leadership, whoever, an expert in the subject matter, they can make a post, and then you can actually sponsor that post to like any audience you want. So something from demand-based, a remarketing audience, an audience of engineers. We just kind of started playing with them, but the potential is there, and it's exactly like she's talking about, where it's a person, but they're from your company. No doubt people are engaging with that post, clicking on the profile. Oh, they're from this company, right? It's pretty impressive.
Thank you for touting thought leader ads.
Hi, thank you for being here. Just had a general question. A few slides ago, you kind of wrapped up the presentation with a slide that was successful B2B measurement. Is there kind of a general or an average time frame to complete that circle?
Do you mean in terms of implementation?
Correct.
I think it really depends on the size of your organization, right? So for like a major Fortune 100, years. Like this is like even deciding how are we going to handle signal collection is something that is incredibly like involves a ton of legal. It involves, RFPing many different vendors, right? So this process for largest organizations takes years, which is why, honestly, in general, they look less advanced actually than some of the smaller ones, right? Like they may be still using some of the like CPC, CPM type of metrics where you'll see like startups actually move quite quickly toward more advanced phases of measurement. I would say that like implementing the full wheel for let's call it a SMB to mid-market company can take anywhere from like, a few months to a year. And then for large organizations, a year plus, and for your Fortune 100s, it's several years. But again, my recommendation would be focus on what's most pressing, number one, and what you can control. So like you may know that the process to get signal collection started is going to be a much tougher battle, but you can do things to improve your reporting that will actually show the need to have better signal. So I'm like big on, LinkedIn's a big company, so I'm big on thinking about like, if I need to get something done, like here is what I can control. I'm gonna do it there, prove it out, and then move outward. And my recommendation there would be similar to how to do brand advertising well, or how to do thought leadership well.
Thank you.
Of course.
I have a follow-on question to that. Real quickly, is we were using a first-party, because you were talking about first-party collections, right? And basically that's journey mapping and trying to figure out where the customer came from and how they got there for attribution.
Yeah.
So we figured out, we started using this new startup Xenon Lab, and they're partnering with Domo to actually do the visualizations, but the AI actually could do it in like 5 days. I'm just curious, have you ever seen anything like that?
I have, and Neustar is a super, super credible company. They're also a partner of ours to do actually some of the really advanced measurement and to do stuff that needs user level data in a very secure way. They're building a lot of really interesting offerings that will continue to evolve over the next year or so there. So I don't know of the exact the AI plugin that you're referring to, which would make the mapping a bunch easier, but they're experts in figuring out I actually need to use user level data, right? But it's gonna be first party data I collected. How do I connect that to outcomes in a secure environment, something like a clean room, And then how do I map that journey and then do so quickly? They are the mainstay in attribution, so it doesn't surprise me that they have tools to quicken the process throughout.
Yeah, this Xenon, it was like 5 days, and they had the attributions figured out in literally just a few days.
That doesn't surprise me, though, because I think what takes long about all of this stuff is the implementation, is the collection of the data, is like getting the tech up and running. It's not the running of the model or the math behind it, Yeah. So what takes a long time is like getting your organization on board and then being like, okay, these are all the signals that we think matter, and we're going to pass these to Neustar and an S3, but like all of that. And then the running of the math that's a query, it's one query.
Yeah,
so
interesting.
that's
Thanks.
the part that should be quick, and that actually makes me really enthused that it was that quick. But that is best in class and should be expected in the future.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Thank you. A great presentation, super informative. With the revenue attribution report, is a super interesting idea and you're saying you're connecting the behavior of people on LinkedIn with your records in your CRM, is that correct? I'm just curious what the mechanism is. Is it only leads that are created through a LinkedIn, or is it any email that, how do those connect there in that revenue attribution report?
So a lead would be a lead that's in your CRM. So it doesn't mean that someone needs to fill out a LinkedIn lead generation form in order to be counted there. It would be when something is tagged as a lead in the CRM. And basically what's happening, it is user level match that's occurring, albeit in a very encrypted environment. LinkedIn is basically looking at the individual that is tied to that lead, or the individual that's tied to that open pipe, the individual that's tied to close one deal, and then did Emily Gustin, who ended up being tied to the lead of the deal, actually see an ad within the look back window or engage with an ad within the look back window? So we have excellent data at LinkedIn. On average, people update who they are and where they work within a month of getting a new role, right? So the ability to do that type of a match with very high fidelity is strong. We are it's a little technical, but we are updating the approach here. So if you wanted to say, that's great, I care about matching just for Emily, but I'm more interested in the whole buying committee, we know it's not just her, that will be an upcoming feature. So you could say, we think that these 10 people are actually tied to the deal, and here's how we would credit that. And worth noting that there's no information that's PII or individual level that's actually shared. The report that's given out is the outcome, how much pipeline did you drive, how many deals did you drive.
We're even doing it with event leads and organic leads, and it was just so much. The attribution there is just crazy. How much they've been acted on LinkedIn without us even knowing before we did it.
Yeah, that's all the dark funnel stuff that people refer to. It's like all of those touch points that happen before somebody hits .com, right? And if you think about the constellation shown earlier, it's like, okay, there's 60% of it that we weren't really looking at before, right?
Oh, sorry. I have a pretty loud voice, so. So what you're saying is when you sponsor an event, right? You send your sales team out there, you do a booth, you're then taking all of the leads from that event and funneling it back into LinkedIn to see both pre and post interaction with the brand?
Exactly. And there's even stuff like LinkedIn campaigns that we had run prior to the event that those certain people had engaged with, which of course we wouldn't have known, right? It's not like we talked to them about that at the event, but sure enough, they're here at the event, they're a lead. Oh, hey, you knew about our CMO white paper that we did 2 months ago. Perfect segue for sales.
Can you do the same thing with thought leaders?
Yeah, I mean, the common denominator there is the stuff that's tracked in the CRM, right? So as long as it turned into a lead, into open pipe, into, then of course.
Because the thought leader is attached to the organization, therefore that interaction with the thought leader's content.
Well, the member is the thing that's being matched. It doesn't really matter what they see, right? You're saying like, did Emily see something and then she was a lead, right? So it's just looking at like every impression served, every engagement. So it doesn't matter what type of content. It could be a thought leader ad. It could be organic. It could be,
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And I think we may be at time. We might have time for one more question, or are we at time? Awkward thing for me now to have asked you. If there's one more, then we can close with that.
One more question?
All right.
No more questions.
All right. Thanks so
Thank
much,
you, guys.
everybody.